right, guys, today we're going to talk about how auctions work. We're going to talk about the different types of auctions and what you should know if you're interested in real estate investing. So first off, the auctions that a lot of people are aware of are typically foreclosure auctions. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about that. The other one is private auctions. Foreclosure is going to be a public auction. Okay, so here's the deal. What's happened over the years is companies like auctions.com, H&D, Williams & Williams, there's a bunch of different auction houses. And what these auction houses do is they do private auctions. Now, a private auction doesn't mean you can't go to it. It means it's done by the private sector rather than being done in a public type setting. But it still means you could go to that. They want people to go to it. What happens is these guys come in when a bank has a bunch of assets that they want to liquidate, maybe they've taken over, and they want to clear it off their balance sheet and get money quick. They'll go to an auction house like this, like auctions.com. And they'll say, hey, we want to sell all of these properties and get them all sold as soon as we can. So what happens is they'll do an auction on this. What they typically do, they've done this virtual and they've done this in person. In person, they'll have everybody there and they'll actually plant representatives in the crowd that represent the bank to drive the price up. Because what they don't tell you about this is there's a minimum reserve. Okay, if it doesn't hit that minimum reserve, then the bank doesn't have to sell it. So there's something called absolute auctions, which means there is no reserve. And then there's reserve auctions. What happens in these private auctions is whatever the highest bidder is, let's say it's $250,000, they're not going to tell you if it meets the reserve or not, but they're going to have you sign and put down earnest money and do all that type of stuff. They are then going to take this offer back to the bank, and then the bank can decide, well, this was the best offer. Do we want to just take it even though it didn't meet our minimum, or do we want to hold off and we'll do something else? Now, maybe they're going to sell the property as is, maybe they're going to fix it up, or whatever the case is. So those are private auctions, and there's the reserve and there's the absolute. You're always going to see those with the reserves. It's very rare that you see an absolute. The other auctions that we didn't talk about is actually tax auctions. There could be property tax, or there's IRS auctions, where the IRS puts a lien on a property and they auction it because they think there's enough value in that. I've actually purchased properties through all of these, through the foreclosure, through the private auction, and through the IRS. Actually, I haven't done a tax sale one. Those are handled differently, actually. So the IRS auction, I've done all those. We'll talk pros and cons here in just a minute, but let's talk a little bit about the foreclosure auction. A lot of people don't realize that foreclosure is a process. So the very first thing that happens is you get a threat letter saying that you're late. Hey, you're late on this payment, pay it to us, we have late fees, all that type of stuff. The first public notification that they do is a notice of default. Or they, depending upon the state, they can do a lis pendens, which means there's legal action pending. I think it's French or something. I don't know why we use it, but that is actually public. And as a matter of fact, you can jump on Investor's Edge software and look and see who has had that happen recently or in your area. Okay, so for example, let's just say that you were in Atlanta, Georgia. Okay, let's just say you're in Atlanta, Georgia, and you want to know, hey, what are we dealing with pre-foreclosures in this area? Well, we actually have it for you up here, but this is going to give you pre-foreclosure properties. Let's take a look at what the filter is on this. So these are residential homes. They're single-family condos, townhouse. They are not listed on the MLS. If we put listed on the MLS, you'd see, well, actually, let's just take that off. See how that jumped up. They have 30% or more of equity, and they're worth $500,000 or less. Notice the default lis pendens is what we're looking at here. So for example, let's just say, hey, here's this property, mortgage transactions. Okay, so there's a mortgage on this one, $175,000. I can come here and say, who is that mortgage with? It's from 2016, Primary Capital. The original loan balance was 208. their estimated interest rate was 300. If they made their payments, it'd be 175. We think it's worth about 264, which means there's $97,000 worth of value on this. And what we know is that they have a notice of default or lis pendens on this. So, notice of trustee sale, here you go. These guys are going to have a sale. This was recorded in July. So these guys have a problem, okay? They've got to either bring their mortgage current or they've got to get out of this. And if I could give them a few bucks, maybe I would give them $5,000 or $10,000 or something and take it over, then they can at least get something out of it unless they have a way of bringing this current or paying off the mortgage in full. So this is somebody that we can, help. Now, obviously with this, next step, we can do a skip trace on it, and that's for another video. But notice of default happens. If you don't get it, then they do what's a notice of sale, which basically says we're going to sell the property this date, this time, and then the actual sale happens. Okay, it depends. Some of them are attorney states, and some you have to go in front of the court. Okay. So, if it's an attorney state, the attorney takes this whole thing, they go to a public place, they publish that, and they start the auction, and they open the auction at some price. The price might be at that reserve that they want, or it might be lower, and then you can bid, and then the attorney is going to bid on behalf of the bank. So basically, what we're trying to do is say, hey, what is this going to sell for? So the bank may continue to go up to 150, and no one else wants it, and then that means it goes back to the bank, and now it becomes an REO, or real estate owned. Okay. Now, let's say if you bid higher than that, you'd have to do 155,000. They don't bid. You end up getting property. Here's the downside, and why I don't think you should be doing foreclosure auctions. One, you can't get inside the house. Okay, unless you knock on the door and they'll let you in, they have no reason to, because they own the house. Until this transfer actually happens, they own the house. And so this is where a lot of the TV shows and that type of stuff come in, because there's a lot of drama. You don't know what you're going to get when you walk into it. Could be good, could be horrible, who knows? But that's not a great situation unless you're really speculative and you're really gambling. And that doesn't work for investors like us, right? We don't want to speculate. We don't want to gamble. So I don't go after foreclosure properties. However, I will go after them pre-foreclosure, the notice of default, lis pendens, and say, hey, let me help you before it goes to foreclosure. I will also go after them after, once they become real estate owned on the bank, because with both these scenarios, I can get inside the property, I can talk to them, I can see what I'm dealing with, I can get full title insurance, I can get full hazard insurance, and that's what you're in. When you come and buy this, a lot of people, they think they're buying a first mortgage, and they actually end up buying a second or a third mortgage, which means you've wasted all this money unless you foreclose out the ones that are ahead. So you've got to really know what you're doing if you want to get into the foreclosure business like this. My recommendation is you don't. My recommendation is you go after the notice of defaults, lis pendens, and the real estate owned properties. And luckily, with Investor's Edge, I can show you what we have for REO properties as well. Do a little filter. Let's reset this filter. And so property characteristics, let's just say, hey, single family houses is what we're going to be going after here. Ownership information, we are going to say absentee owner type. We're going to say it's corporate owned. And let's say that it's on the market. Oh, not owner occupied. Let's get rid of that. Let's do any property characteristics. Let's say we want a 3-bed, a 2-bath. I mean, I'm just putting this at random. It depends on what you're looking for in your area. MLS status. Let's say we want something that is on the market, something that is listed. So we've narrowed that down to 850. Here's your pre-foreclosure and bank owned. We could say, hey, we want bank-owned properties. So we come down to 7 of those. I can take off corporate-owned. Whoops. Let's go bank-owned on this. And there's 14 properties, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. The other thing I like to do, I just want to make sure we don't go after really expensive properties. Anything over $500,000 right now is not moving. So let's just say 400. 400,000 just say. So there's 10 properties we can go after. All of these are owned by banks and they are currently listed on the multiple listing service. So I can just make an offer with an agent. I can go inside and see that. Now, we want to see something kind of cool. Let's say they're not listed. There's 46 properties that are not listed with agents that are owned by banks. You should be watching for these and trying to get in touch with these guys as well. So lots of options there, and that's what we're dealing with. Now, if we want to deal with the pre-foreclosures, like I said, we can look at this and say, hey, I just want notice of defaults, okay? So notice of defaults or list pendants, there's 22 right now. Auctions, there are 19. Default releases, doesn't look like we've got any matches on that. Bank-owned properties and exclude foreclosures. Let's see what that does. Yeah, it doesn't even have a hit on that one. So that's what we're dealing with, guys. So you can find those and you can go after those properties and see. So when it's all said and done here, the reason why I would be interested in private auctions versus public auctions is I get full title insurance, I get to see the property, I have an inspections period, I can get full hazard insurance. Those things are important. Most places you can't do that when you're dealing with a public auction. There are a few states that are exceptions to that, but for the most part you can't. So that's why I don't like to go over foreclosure auctions. Now, going after public auctions for the notice of default or notice of sale, absolutely, and you should be finding them and you should be going after those properties. And if we're going after bank-owned properties, we can go after those because once the bank has it, we can do an inspection, we can get full title insurance, we can get hazard insurance. So when we talk about how these auctions work, they're either happening through a private, which basically means a bank or a company is unloading a bunch of assets, and they're doing that through an auction that has a minimum reserve, or it's through a foreclosure process where a bank is actually taking back the asset. So the idea is if the bank gives a loan, they have a loan and they have a note and a trust deed or a note and a mortgage. The note is the promise to repay. Hey, we'll pay you back. The trust deed or the mortgage is the collateral that says, hey, if you don't pay us back, this is what we get. The foreclosure is the process of the bank taking that back. And if somebody bids more on the property than the bank wants, then they get to take it. That money goes to the bank to pay the bank, and the bank moves on. If not, then the bank gets the asset, and then that becomes what's called an REO or real estate owned. So this is basically what you need to know about auctions. Again, don't recommend you going after the actual foreclosure sale that's public. We want to do it before, or we want to get to it after.